Я большой привет, конечно, тоже от фонд Наумана. Мы как немецкий либеральный фонд считаем наша работа в России как важная часть российско-немецкого диалога. И я думаю, сегодня это один из этих частей. Окей, на английском. We had the discussion already in the morning with the question of democracy, whether democracy is always the best guarantor for the market. And I just wanted to refocus for a second the thinking on what this friendship or this fans of liberty, liberals, libertarians are really after. You could ask the question whether you want freedom in itself or whether you see freedom as an instrument for other means. For example, if you see freedom only as an instrument to achieve a better economy, a better economic result, then you might find under certain circumstances that to achieve certain results, you could also plan them. It is really depending on the concrete efficiency of the action you deal with. I would think that only thinking in the efficiency or the freedom as an instrument does not make you a libertarian. That could be also a conservative or a socialist who is not very stupid and who understands that markets are better to solve economic problems. So the general difference between these different value systems, I would think, is that a socialist value system is based on or focused on material equality as a communitarian utopia in a very, very simplified understanding. And in the same very simplified understanding, you would say the conservative utopia and where the conservative value set is based on is also a communitarian set of values based on stability, on the preservation of culture, tradition, and stability of the state, where the liberal or libertarian set of values is not communitarian, but individualistic and focused on individual freedom and responsibility. And that, of course, has a number of implications for political and economic thinking. I think it is the same reason why I will now, just for not to say liberal and libertarian all the time, I will say liberal, but you know what I mean, the freedom-focused set of values, that for a liberal, therefore it's the same thing when you have individual responsibility and freedom at the center. It's the same thing to argue for civic rights in the social political sphere as for economic freedom in the economic sphere. And it's not things you can easily separate. Personally, when I heard the argument about democracy, I usually take this also, probably it's my problem to oversimplify things, but I like the Popper argument that just defends democracy as the system that allows regular change without bloodshed. So it allows to change the government without people being killed, and that is already the most basic defense of democracy. But now back to individual freedom. I read a little bit Isaiah Berlin in preparation to remind myself again about the foundation of where does this impulse come from that some people think that liberty should be the guiding principle of a society, and he calls this an anarchic impulse. It's this anarchic impulse that people don't want, or some people react reluctantly to interventions from others. And this is the basic foundation. He says this is very abstract, Berlin, so he says it can only be guiding as a compass, so that the compass, that the bigger the sphere of non-intervention, the bigger is my freedom. But second, for this abstract concept to become a political concept, it needs to be constituted, and this is what Hayek calls the constitution of liberty. And the German-English philosopher, liberal Ralph Dahrendorf, said that this already constitutes a big problem, because this is constituting a liberal order already limits freedom, because in the moment you constitute, you set up a set of rules, of course you limit the freedom. And this is also already true of the famous saying that the freedom of one person should end where the freedom of another person starts. And it of course comes even more complicated if you introduce common goods, but that is something libertarians are in tendency not focusing their time on. So Isaiah Berlin says that other concepts, to introduce concepts like justice and equality, are not per se bad, but they are different concepts. And that comes out already when you look at the famous differentiation between negative and positive freedoms. I mean, I don't know who I need to remind about the difference between negative and positive freedom. You're very well aware. So simplified, negative freedom, the freedom against intervention, and positive freedom, the freedoms to something, like to get some common goods. And in the critique of Ralph Dahrendorf, he says that separating between negative and positive freedom, Berlin makes one big mistake. He makes a second mistake, which he admits himself, and thirdly, he introduces a great concept. And the mistake he does, the first big mistake, is to call negative freedom, which is freedom. So to call something negative, which is really what is the basic constitution of freedom, as the most important principle. And so it's more a linguistic problem already, because at the end all our political freedoms are based on negative, of what Berlin calls negative freedoms. And the second mistake is to call positive freedom freedom at all, because when you look in the argument what he calls positive freedom, it's what Hegelian Marxist concept. Oh God, you remind me of time, right? What Hegelian and Marxist concepts constitute as communitarian goods, and that has nothing to do with freedom. So the important thing is to not make this confusion, and to quote Dahrendorf on that, nothing is won with the confusion of concepts. A sacrifice does not make bigger what was sacrificed, freedom. It does not matter how big the moral imperative is or the moral benefit, everything is what it is. Freedom is freedom, not equality or fairness or culture or human happiness or a good conscience. So there is no social freedom. There is only the concept of what he calls negative freedom, which is the freedom of non-intervention, and the other concepts are not as such bad, and this is what Dahrendorf calls as the third big concept which is inherited in this Berlin separation between positive and negative freedom, because this is at the end saying that there is some sort of pluralism of different values. As a liberal, you might have at the center the individual freedom, but you can of course differentiate it also when you see that there is moral or other imperatives to go in one direction or the other. So it means, for example, I come from a Baltic German family, where Tevtonci, who lived in Estonia and Latvia, at the time when my great-grandparents were still living there, these Germans, who were less than 5% of the population, owned 100% of the territory. This is something which in a political world you cannot deal only with the guarantee of property rights if you want to prevent some civic unrest or civil war start at one point or the other. Like if you have such an extreme inequality in a society, then you have also as a liberal the possibility to intervene, but you have to know that any intervention limits freedom, and you have to deal with this problem that sometimes you have to sacrifice one value for another. We know where our compass is, but it is an intrinsic problem which we have to deal with this value pluralism. And I mean, Hayek says about that a society that does not recognize that each individual has values of his own also, which is the other aspect of pluralism, which he's entitled to follow himself. As such a society cannot respect for the dignity of the individual and cannot really know freedom. Now I try to limit myself. This is, yeah. So I come back to what this leads to for political concepts. So you have this value pluralism. You have a compass which points to the direction of freedom, and you have to create an order in which these basic values are preserved. And normally, the Liberty Party in most countries on this planet is not always the strongest. And so what is the political aim to achieve is that at least that, because usually the stability or the equality parties are more popular, they have stronger battalions who follow their value system. And this is why a liberal system needs to enforce as a core element the rule of law, because this is the only system that can prevent the violation of civil rights and individual freedom, also against mass and democratic, probably democratic processes where populists gain power. So this is the core element of a free society, and I quote Hayek there on the end that the state should confine itself to establish rules applying to general types of situations and should allow the individual freedoms in everything which depends on the circumstances of time and place, because only the individuals concerned in each instance can truly know these circumstances and adapt their actions to them. I leave it at there. I hope that it wasn't too abstract and we can become more concrete in the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
где удобно. Спасибо большое за доклад, Юлиус. Есть ли вопросы к докладчику? Да.
Okay, thank you very much for your intervention. Now, intervention in completely positive way, meaning of the word, I mean. Okay, so you have outlined in the very last part of your speech, you have outlined quite a grim picture that the supporters and the promoters of the individual freedom as the most important value are always in minority. That the supporters of equality, the supporters of stability, of socialist and conservative perspectives are much stronger usually. And of course, as far as we can see, it's true. But I want to ask, what do you think about it? If it's just some timely occasion, it's a global trend, or it's just a human nature? Can we expect that it would change, maybe not tomorrow, but sometimes, at least in some distant future, or it will be a constant situation till the humanity lives?
I think that actually it's not entirely true that the liberals are always in the small defensive part. When you look how deep embedded some liberal values are already in other parties, I mean, when you look at the big economic reforms of Great Britain, of Germany, were also prolonged by social democrats. Yeah? I mean, it was the Schröder reforms in Germany that created the market conditions of today. It was Tony Blair who basically continued most of Thatcher's policies in the economic sphere. So this is the first point. Second, I was recently at the conference of the ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, where you have a big spectrum of liberals from left to right. I mean, also in Russia, Jabloko is a member of ALDE and Parnas is a member of ALDE. And you have the British Lib Dems, which are more left, and you have the German Free Democrats or the Dutch VVD, which are more economically right. And at this convention, I realized there's currently more governance in Europe than ever before are actually liberal. We have actually, in the moment, 8 liberal prime ministers in Europe, mostly of smaller, mostly of northern states, but still. And we have another 7 governments where liberals are in. So we have in Estonia, we have the liberal government in Luxembourg, in Holland, in Belgium, in Slovenia, and we have a new, even in the darkest times of now Poland, where we see it looks like all the principles of freedom are turned back by this peace party. We have a new liberal party, economic liberal party, which is in the polls up to 30%. So I don't think that this idea is only in defense, but as I think for a liberal, the most important thing is to implement principles. We don't want an utopia to implement. We want to enforce principles. Is something completely different than the utopistic political ideologies, because for a liberal it's not so important to rule as long as these values are implemented. And I think this is why this is enough. I don't think liberal parties need to rule all the time. We are happy if the rule of law is implemented. Thank you.